I'm joined today with Carolyn Grant. Thank you, Carolyn, for coming to the Resolution Room.
Thank you for asking me. This is great.
We actually met through, you did a Boardroom presentation to a board that my wife's on, and I looked at your work in terms of psychosocial risks and psychological safety, and it's such a interesting and important topic at all levels of organisations, and so important in leadership, and frankly, not something sort of psychological safety was a term that you would have spoken about much 7 to 10 years ago. So it's in that sense it's new, but it's increasingly important. So thanks for coming. I know you're a consultant and a researcher and also a neuromarketer as well. So you've got a really diverse and interesting background. I thought what we'd do is start by getting some clarity about what is psychological safety and what it's not. And then we'll talk about psychosocial risks and what's the distinction.
So psychological safety is the environment that we can create. And it says, I feel safe around the people, within the room that I'm in, to speak up, to ask for help, ask questions, seek clarity if I want, or to challenge the status quo. I'm able to come up with better ideas or suggest that we do alternative things. But I can do that safely only when I don't feel like I'm going to be threatened or punished. So I'm not going to be humiliated, embarrassed, dismissed,
disregarded.
And probably when we do our research, the key question is, do I feel like it's worth it?
And I guess you can distinguish it for those in the conflict space that I'm in, is that it's not about being nice, because psychological safety is about healthy challenge. And all organisations and even, good government, the people sometimes that you have very different views, they're the people that you need in the room for obvious reasons.
Absolutely. There's two things that you've got to have. Accountability, because without it, you've got no guardrails. Ethical slide starts to happen. If not, we start to bring in a lot of cognitive biases that make it very easy for us to dismiss things. So we need accountability. We need to know that there is a consequence to behaviours or to not achieving something. So that's one thing we need. And the other is that should develop intellectual friction, which is what you're talking about, that ability to have different ideas, and we might not necessarily agree. Yeah, there's different perspectives coming. There might be different ways of getting around things, and that can be facilitated in a way that we all come out feeling good about ourselves, not feeling like we've been embarrassed or humiliated, or I'm never going to speak up again because if that's the way they treat people,
Yeah.
And even witnessing that is similar to experiencing it yourself. You start to go, oh, okay, I know the norm now here. The rule is don't speak up.
Yeah. And the concept I think Steve Simpson writes about unwritten ground rules in culture, so one of them is, your views won't really be respected around here, or you have to reach a certain level of an organisation before your voice is heard. So psychological safety sort of cuts through that and says you're trying to create an environment in which people are seen and heard and understood, and create that level of emotional friction intellectual friction, I should say, that you need for best outcomes. So that's psychological safety. And as I said, it's probably a newer concept, but such an important concept in workplaces. And of course, then there's the more regulatory landscape, if I can refer to it as that. I was more of an insurance lawyer, but I worked closely with employment lawyers. And that's about managing psychosocial risks and hazards, and there's a code that pertains to that. So talk us through the difference. What is the difference? What is a psychosocial hazard?
Yeah, so psychosocial hazards, the best way I describe it to the people that I'm working with is they're those things, those factors, those elements at work that create stress. You could be bringing that in. You could be bringing that because home is a little bit difficult, going through a rough stage. It could be that finances are tough. It could be that economic conditions have made it even tougher. So you could be bringing those into your workplace, and that can have an impact on you and the way that you then behave in the workplace, and it can have an impact on the people that you're sitting next to. But then you've got the psychosocial hazards that happen at work. So they're the things that are happening because of the way work is managed.
Yeah.
So that could be your supervisors, that could be change management, your communication.
The level of autonomy.
Yeah. The way work is done, whether I have any job control, whether I have a say in the way work's done.
Well, some
over
jobs
time.
have traumatic material or traumatic events that they have to,
you've got the environment. So we did some work with a manufacturing plant, and in summer it is hot. There are very fans don't do a lot when you're dealing in 42 degree heat, and that's that's the norm. So you keep going, and then conversely in winter, sub-zero temperatures, and you've got a different problem. Not a lot of ways to manage that. And then you've got the one that really comes up the most and is always like top 3, which is relationships and your social relationships. And that can start anywhere from rumours and people just being uncivil or disrespectful all the way through to their behaviours in terms of aggression, bullying and harassment, sexual harassment.
I was reminded of that actually this morning because I follow Esther Perel, who started her life as a relationship coach in intimate relationships, and now she's in workplace because workplace relationships are so central and some of the key learnings. I thought it was really interesting because it goes to the heart of it really matters, and people leave often relationships and people in workplaces. We all know that.
Yeah.
Why is it such an important buzzword now, psychological safety, and how important is it?
So it started really around education. They were trying to find a safe place for people to be able to learn and to grow and, having that whole growth mindset. So psychological safety started way back with like William Kahn in the 1970s or something. Amy Edmondson has made it extremely popular because she brought it into workplaces going, well, actually, I think this actually applies to workplaces. And if we use this in the context of health and nurses not being able to speak up about accidents, we find that the highest performing teams are the ones that can report incidences. The reason I love that concept and then applied it to what we do around psychological safety and around the psychosocial hazard assessment is because you can look at these hazards that are happening in the workplace and you can report on how impactful they are, which is going to be different for everyone. Really invisible, hard to see, hard to diagnose. There's a stigma attached to it, so trying to get that information is very difficult. But also there's a lot of institutional betrayal out there where some of the most common things we hear is, HR they're not here to represent us, they're here to represent the partners and themselves. WHS doesn't know how to have a conversation with us. What's the point of talking up? No, they've never done anything. We do culture surveys every single year, but no one's ever done anything with them. So there's this sense of betrayal that's in organisations, which is why their trust is quite low.
Yeah.
Before you even look at going through the process of assessing your psychosocial hazards, which is part of workplace health and safety requirement obligation, you've got to make sure you've got the environment to get that information. And if you've been distrusted and you still have an element of distrust, are you really the right people to be able to get that information?
That's right. Looking at psychosocial hazards, the regulatory framework is an employer has to do all that is reasonably practicable to mitigate, minimise or manage risks in the workplace, and they include psychosocial risks. So the code is relatively new and it outlines the key psychosocial risks. We've touched upon them. Yeah. Autonomy, traumatic material, the way work is structured, organisational justice processes. And it's a really useful guide. And I think lots of people in employment land can throw their hands in the air and go, this is all too hard. And why your work is important is because you give boards, organisation leaders very practical tools to assess them and then take steps to proactively manage it. So let's talk first about the assessment process, the tools, what your research has been in that space, and let's then move on to the management piece, if I can call it that. So talk first about the assessment piece. I mean, you can say to people reliably, hey, you want to know what's really going on? Come to me because I've got X or Y. What do you have?
First of all, if everyone understood their obligations, that's probably the most important thing. And anytime before we even start our assessments, we always talk about education training so that they understand. Most of the time we're going in to repair a lot of the trust that's been eroded. And it's not necessarily the current managers. It might be that that's happened before. Education and training and making sure leaders know is really critical. And then you've got assessment. So part of the requirements under the legislation is that you must consult and you must identify what hazards are particular to your workplace. Yes. And they're all going to be very different. Yep. But also people are very different. So the impacts of all of those hazards that we were talking about are going to be different. Yep. And we have different managers and we have different peers. So some of the frequency of how often we might be getting some of that could be different. Has it been going on for 12 months? Has it been going on for 2 years? So these are really critical pieces of information that you can use to identify where your biggest risks are. And that's why I love it so much. I actually think it's one of the best pieces of legislation because it actually gives you, here's the process, here's the step by step. It's so clear cut. But from our perspective, you can use a free tool. The government has a free assessment tool with organisations that are 25 or more. So that's available. But that will give you your psychosocial hazard only. What we've done is said, well, we're a real advocate for business here. We want to do this because we believe that if our employees are happy, our leaders are doing the right thing, our organisations... Yeah, that has an influence on our community. It has an influence everywhere. So if we can get those businesses operating really well because their people are healthy and thriving, then we all win. So our tool or our assessment tool looks at those hazards, but it looks at what the foundations are and where the root causes are so that we can actually target those. And I think that's the important part because we want something that's sustainable, but is actually moving us into that high performance because we want businesses to be
That's right. So it's not a tick a box, it's about getting better. And so you've developed what they call the Boardroom Psychological Safety Index?
So we've got an organisational psychological safety index, but then we noticed that...
Is that done through a series of, questionnaires and also interviews? How's that conducted?
It's up to the client generally. We prefer to have interviews. What we do is we allow people to choose. And I think it's got to be that. That's a great sense of autonomy right there, isn't it? I'll choose how I want to engage with you. The survey gives you the quantitative, which is great. It shows me where the priorities have to go. But the interviews give me the really rich data and context.
Yeah, that's right. So in other words, I'm in an organisation, I'm a new manager, there's been some legacy issues or there's things that I want to get better and do differently. So I'm going to, depending on which tool, there's autonomy around that in terms of client choice, but I'm going to get a snapshot of where the challenges and where they are. So I might get a snapshot, hey, trust is low in this department. What other snapshots? What are the metrics that I'll see generally that give me a sense of what I need to do?
So we look at trust because it is absolutely foundational. We talk about how change management fails, another psychosocial hazard.
Yeah.
Communication, another psychosocial hazard. And when you look and able to measure that and identify where that is, if you've got a low level of trust from your front line, that we don't trust the decisions being made by our leadership team, well, you can kind of go, I know why change management isn't really occurring. No one's agreeing with the decisions. So we can spend a fortune, as we did once. We had a client call and go, look, we've got some issues. We're sending out invitations to our Christmas party and no one wants to come. And I go, is that really your issue? And they went, no, we think it might be a bit deeper than that. And I went, okay, good.
That's a symptom, a big symptom.
It's a big symptom. And their solution
I prefer to
was...
brush my hair. I've got something else on.
That's right. And their solution was, let's invest in more events and barbecues. We need to create more connection because we've just had COVID and this would be a great... I said, well, you could do that, or we could go and get some diagnostics and actually work out where you need to spend your money.
Yeah.
Because why spend $30,000 over there when you could spend $30,000 or $20,000 over here, but actually hit the root cause?
And to give that example, and I know you mightn't be privy to be able to say, but what was the root cause of something like that? Are you able to shed some light on that?
Yeah, and it was a national construction company, and from a state perspective, a lot of them weren't Christians. The issues at the time was that they were so overwhelmed. In fact, it was a really interesting case because there were two states that were outperforming others, or I should say underperforming others. And the leadership team didn't believe us. They went, that can't be right because our CEO's in one and our director's in the other. And we said, well, let's find some more context. We're going through interviews, which is the reason I love interviews so much because you get so much context. What it came down to was the client. So the client brought in, had just been signed, had only been rolled out in 2 states. Their processes, their systems, their instructions, their blueprints, the way that they worked with that team, totally different. And it actually had people having to go back on bridges, overloading their trucks, to in some of those cases you can have really routine work, and just them being able to tick that gives them that sense of, well, I've done my job well. It doesn't matter how routine it is or how simple it is. The fact is that they've been able to tick that and move on. If day after day they can't do that because they haven't got the right tools, they haven't got the right equipment because they've been briefed incorrectly, their sense of satisfaction starts to drop. But these guys were getting called at 10 o'clock at night to change site details and things like that. So what it came down to were the two states. It had nothing to do with the leadership. It was the management of that new contract.
New client,
And it was great that we picked it out then, because it was going to be rolled out to every single state. And at least those two states had some leadership supports and some people they could draw upon to actually meet some of the needs.
Yeah. That's a really interesting example, actually, of drilling down and getting to the core of what's really going on. So again, as a manager, I come in, I've engaged you for this psychological safety index. It's hopefully, say for example, I want the Rolls Royce, Carolyn. I want both the interviews and the survey approach. What are some of the metrics? What will I see? I'll see perhaps metrics around trust.
Trust, yeah.
What other metrics will I see?
You'll get respect.
Yep.
You'll get psychological safety and all the elements that fit within that. So what are some of the factors that drive psychological safety?
Yep.
And some of those are how valued do I feel?
Yeah.
A lot of the time on our boards we find that people are 100% aligned in this is meaningful to me. But when you actually say how valued are you, and some of the questions we might ask around that is, do you feel like your skills are 100% optimised? And they go, actually no, they're not. I'm sitting here and I've been put on the marketing committee, but I actually have a lot more to offer. So we stereotype people and go, you'll be happy over there and that's what we want you to do. So we get a lot of that no, my skills are not optimised on this board. I'm not giving them 100%. We'll look at values.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things we did last year is we actually looked at emotional capital. So how are they turning up at work? Because if you're turning up at work and it's so clear, if you have a look at someone who's saying, I feel like I'm anxious. I feel like I'm sick every time the ding comes up to remind me that I've got my board meeting tomorrow. I start to feel physically sick.
Yeah.
I know that when I come in, I've got all of this paper here because I have to be prepared for every single question in case they attack me.
Yeah.
That's very different to if someone says, oh, yeah, like I just feel so fulfilled. I feel proud. I feel happy. We're a team here. So emotional capital has
That's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah. But we'll look at psychosocial hazards. So boards, have the requirement to actually look at the organisation, but they're part of that organisation. They set they often set the strategy, they set the tone within the boardroom, whether there's a blame culture, just by how you question.
Exactly, by how they question, how they turn up, how they engage.
Yeah, what are you focusing on? If you're saying we are a customer-driven organisation, but you never ask about customers, you're kind of saying, no, we're not. But if you're constantly looking at the financials, then you're kind of setting that's all they care about. So the next time you do a report, just make sure that the financials are right. Don't worry about anything else. So we often look at values alignment. So are their values aligned? And we've had some really good indicators where we've had a couple of companies that are a little bit uncertain about if their, let's say, consultants are all doing the right thing. And we've done an assessment and we've seen two huge outliers that were, here's customer-centric all the way down except for two who were financially motivated. And, of course, they were the two that had been overcharging clients, let's say, or finishing a project and actually staying just that little bit longer until the actual contract was done. So clients were noticing these things. So, there's some really great tools. So we look at values, emotional capital, trust, psychological safety. The trust elements too, we sort of follow the Covey model. We look at not just integrity, but we look at intention, and then we look at results, and then we look at capability and look at communication. And when we see the results of like the Boardroom psychological safety assessment, it's really, really clear that we're lacking in our communication skills as part of our capability, and that the frontline team do not trust a lot of the capability that's sitting around that boardroom table at the moment, or the executive team. And then when you go why, it's looking at like 8% believe that they're accountable for some of the behaviours and some of the goings on within the boardroom and around modelling the right behaviours. So we look at those elements because they really tell us, it's okay to say that trust is an element here, but tell me where do we have to fix things? Is it around the capability?
Yeah, that's right. Where do I need to focus?
Yeah.
And how can I do that reliably? I think you might have some research you can share, some more recent research that you can share. What are some of the highlights of some of the recent research?
It was really great. I loved it because it came up with this power of three, because I love finding themes that make it really easy for me to speak about.
In threes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just so true. There's so many things. But so what we found was this lovely set of three, and what it said to us was if you are rating yourself as a high-performing board and you're saying that your decisions around strategy, around culture, and around getting the right results for your stakeholders, if they rated themselves as high in that area, what we found was they were the ones that were having 3 times the level of psychological safety. They had 3 times the level of trust. They had 3 times less psychosocial hazards identified.
Right.
They had 3 times less the cognitive biases that we found in some of the conversations that we had where they were talking about some of the issues. So it just went, okay, if we're not creating the right environment, we haven't got the right environment that's actually going to mitigate some of these biases that we have. Some of it is more around halo effect, or they're a lot like me, so I'm just going to vote that way, or I'm not going to challenge anything. Authority bias. Well, they've been here longer, and they're supposed to be the expert. Let's not ask a question. We don't want to. Interestingly, it was around. I think it was 75% said that we don't feel safe to challenge. So yeah, that's right. Because I usually talk the opposite way, trying to be a bit more positive. 25% don't challenge. But out of that, then 68% said, look, we don't challenge the CEO or the chair because of the authority bias. It's, we don't want the other 20, and I think there was around 28% that said, well, we don't challenge them because we don't want to appear foolish. And what are we supposed to be doing? We're supposed to be challenging that. And we're going to see more of that. Because, we just had a couple of legal actions where CEOs were done for not actually applying due diligence around workplace health and safety.
I saw that.
This thing of, well, it was their job. Well, no, your job is to make sure it's all done, So once we see those biases are occurring, if we haven't got the psychological safety, you can't mitigate that. And so that requires processes. But the research says that only 12% of us actually have the right processes to mitigate all those natural biases that are coming in.
Yeah.
Because we haven't got the bright lines that say, absolutely, we will not compromise on the following. Yep. We don't have those things in place. So we're allowing this little ethical slide to start to happen.
And it's really interesting what I'm hearing and teasing it out is that it's not just a regulatory requirement. Sure, it is all that. But it goes to the heart of high performance because what your research is telling us is that, high levels of psychological safety, trust, these teams are performing, 3 times. And that's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah. And also at the same time, they're getting that amazing benefit of growth and productivity, but they're also stopping catastrophic risk.
Yeah.
You look at some of the dream world. You look at, normalising compliance differences.
Yeah.
Again, normalising the fact that, well, it hasn't happened before. Optimism bias.
Yeah.
Well, it hasn't, nothing's gone wrong before. Let's keep going. To Boeing, to NASA's experiences, all started with psychological safety and then the biases coming in.
Yeah, there's a
normalise.
great book about that with the cultural plays in the pilot industry where Crash, that famous story where there were Asian pilots who weren't culturally felt appropriate to challenge.
Yeah, I think it was, Korean one. So,
that's right.
Because it was inappropriate for a junior to question
challenge the captain. And
so
that's about psychological safety. It goes to the heart of performance and genuine workplace health and safety, the ability to be able to speak up.
Yeah.
In your work, it's obviously now of great import. It's been considered at a board level, which is welcome. It's been considered as an executive level. Do you think in terms of, say, the next stage, which is management, the question then becomes how do you manage it? Well, that only stems from an understanding of what you need to manage. And to do this assessment gives you a good snapshot, realistically, not just anecdotally, not just, based on all the bias about what we think, but actually gives you a genuine snapshot about what you need to focus on. And then what do you do organisationally? Do you obviously work with the leaders in terms of the implementation and focus and execution?
Yeah, look, I think from a decision-making perspective, what you want to know is, where am I going to get the greatest return?
Yeah, that's right.
How can I accelerate change? And how can I do it in a way where I'm optimising the current resources I have? And that's what that report gives you. It says, here's your priority. Here's your highest impacts. If you're going to do anything, start here.
Focus on that.
Yeah. There is no point having more sausage barbecues if you've got bullying and harassment happening at ridiculous rates.
That's right.
And that's what we tend to do. Or we'll throw a yoga studio into a campus.
Someone had another wellness idea or...
Yeah, and I think that's... So you can get great growth potential and great returns that are, for every dollar spent, a minimum of a $2.80 return if you do the recommendations that are right.
Yeah.
But if you actually just are ticking a box, then you're not going to see those returns. And in fact, you're going to have all your good people leave because they're just going to find somewhere better.
Disengaged.
And they'll be totally disengaged. So that's where you get, some of the real gold in being able to move people into performance. So I think at the minimum, that's what I love about our report. It says, here's fundamentally what you need to
work on.
From a performance level, we can also go down to teams and go, here are some really great performing teams. Why aren't we sharing some information about how they're working together? What
makes them great?
What makes them so great? Because we don't have to have all the answers. The answers are there within the business. We talk about these... Oh, it's okay that those people left. They were, non-regrettable leavers. I've never heard such rubbish in all my life. You've invested in this person, and if they're leaving, whether, is that a result of the organisation or is that a result of, either way, it comes down to you recruited that person, you hired that person, you've trained that person. So what about the environment has maybe created that?
What are the lessons in that?
Yeah.
Do you find, Carolyn, in your work that there's broader level of take-up and engagement? Do you think the message is getting out there? Do you think people are taking it seriously now that it's been enacted by way of a code, there's a regulatory framework?
No, the research says no. I think we're getting there. I think we haven't had a lot go into the courts yet, because it's still kind of in its infancy around the psychosocial.
And the regulators still finding their way,
They've been great, haven't they? They have said, we're giving you all of these tools. We are giving you free tools. We're giving you these guides. We're educating you. We're working with you. And one of the directors in New South Wales Safe Work actually said, well, we've done that, but now enough's enough. Now
serious.
We're coming.
Yeah,
we're coming in.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. But listen, a couple of things just by way of summary. Firstly, of course, I really appreciate your time and expertise, and I've really enjoyed meeting you. This is such an important topic. From a board level, from an organisational level, I would say to people out there, go to People Plus Science, look up Carolyn Grant and her work, because there's some rigour and there's some science and research around what you do. And it's from that rigour that you can then proceed to address these very material risks. So thanks for your time again, Carolyn. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Damien. Thank you.
Cheers.